Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today we're going to talk about the R5C, but before I do that, it's minus like 30 or 40 outside, and I want to go see if there's sundogs. Now what sundogs are is basically a rainbow around the sun because it's so cold that there's icicles in the sky, and it's crazy. Anyways, let's go check it out. So I haven't talked about this a lot yet, but so I actually moved back to my hometown of Regina, Saskatchewan a couple months ago in September. And so a big reason why I haven't been posting a lot is because I've been busy with that move. Okay, it's not out today. It's actually warmed up a bit. That's a good sign. I'll post some vertical video I got of some really awesome ones the other day. I'll have to try and get another time. Anyways, come check out this frozen wasteland I live in. Alright, so it is cold, so let's just go back and let's talk about this camera. Welcome back, everybody. My name is Ben Schubert. I'm a filmmaker, and today I want to talk about the launch of the Canon R5C. And what that means, it means a lot of different things depending on what you actually need. So, just to start off, I have the R5. That's what I'm filming on right now. And I was really looking forward to the R5C. I didn't necessarily want to replace this camera so soon, but should I? That's the question. And so one of the things that I'm thinking about right now is, does that make sense for me to do moving forward? And you might be asking yourself the same thing. Maybe it makes sense for you to move forward. Who knows? We'll find out. The Canon R5C is essentially a way for Canon to, kind of up the ante on the R5 and make it really more of a video focused camera. And they've taken it further than I think I thought they would go with it, in some good ways and some maybe less great ways. I think what I expected was more just, they would add a fan and that was essentially it, right? So same camera, slightly more expensive, better cooling system, but that's all that they would add. They've definitely gone above and beyond with that. It's just a question of, does that make sense for me and what I do? So let's start off by talking about some of the more exciting things that they've done. So first of all, that fan, that cooling system. That's going to be really great for making this, a solid, usable camera moving forward. So the R5 has generally been plagued with overheating issues that, Canon has done an okay job of mitigating. Things are a lot better than they were when they first launched. But, there's definitely room for improvement. So having that fan takes the overheating issue away completely. So that's awesome. That's exactly what people are asking for. And as a result of that fan, one of the things that they're able to do is they're able to add the 8K 60 in RAW, which is amazing. And that's very usable for a lot of different applications and for a lot of different people, especially with a camera body this small. To have that capability is awesome. It still has all the same photo capabilities, which is great. So it's basically R5 for photos. That's awesome. Now, one interesting thing, for better or worse, that they've done is they've added a switch at the back where the power button is, where you can switch between, is it photo, video, or off. And what's really interesting is when you switch those modes, you actually go between, the photo menus from a Canon, stills camera to the cinema menu of the Canon Cinema line, which is very interesting, especially if you're used to one way or the other. I use both, so I'm kind of used to both. So I probably could have gone either way. So I think for me, that's just fine. Now, another really interesting thing that they've added is Timecode Out. That may seem small to a lot of people who aren't used to these kinds of cameras, but having Timecode Out on a camera this small is pretty awesome. That makes it really useful for a lot of, syncing, working with audio, which is something you would more do for like a film set, maybe like a multicam shoot, something like that, where you are using separate audio and syncing, like documentary shoots, like that's a really handy thing. That's like a pro grade thing. And then one of the other things which I think is really awesome and really compelling for this kind of camera is that hot shoe where you can mount that XLR adapter. To be able to have XLRs on a camera like this is amazing, right? XLRs are almost one of the main reason that I've gone with my C200 for so long and that kind of camera, and why I've leaned in that direction. But to be honest, to have that ability in a camera this small is also very compelling. Like how usable that is, that's another question. Now, all these things together really kind of combine to make this a really awesome, viable 8K video camera. So those are some of the pros, some of the real positive things that are coming out about this camera. What are some of the cons? Now, one of the things that we don't get is we don't get C-Log 2. Now, I've owned the R5 since it came out, and we still don't have C-Log 2 on that. And I would actually argue that I don't know that this camera has the dynamic range to warrant C-Log 2. C-Log 3 is great. You can get a really great image with C-Log 3. But I kind of feel like that's the extent of the dynamic range on this camera. And that being said, I don't think that's a bad thing. C-Log 2 can be really great if you have really bright scenes where you're exposing for, you know, really bright highlights and you're still wanting to keep some shadows, but you're not going to lose out on a lot of detail, and a lot of that information will just get crushed in the end anyways. C-Log 3 can be really good. For instance, this is C-Log 3. I think it looks plenty fine. Like C-Log 2 would be amazing. I've got that on my C200, but that camera has more dynamic range, and I think it makes sense to go with that kind of dynamic range, which is also why, you know, the C70 has C-Log 2. The C70 allegedly has, you know, 16 stops of latitude. All that being said, unless you're finishing to an HDR output, and even then, it's not really a big issue. Because, you know, if you're going to Rec 709, that's what, 7 stops of latitude in the end? So you're crushing down to be within that range no matter what. And most things are just going for Rec 709. It's pretty rare that anyone's doing HDR. Now, one thing I haven't heard any mention about, and I think is kind of critical for me, is that with this new fan, is this still weather sealed? Now, I think there's ways to do it where you keep your weather sealing and you have your fan, but whether they did that is a question. I feel like it is more open to the elements than the R5, which, you know, is a huge advantage if you have an R5 and are looking to keep it, because you get that weather sealing. And it just kind of depends on, is that important to you? Doesn't matter. The other thing you lose, which, you know, might not be a huge loss to a lot of people, is Ibis. Right? There's no Ibis in this camera. It has the digital IS. But honestly, in a lot of ways, I would think if you're someone who typically shoots on a 16 to 35, the Ibis is likely driving you insane, and you're better off stabilizing in post. Especially if you're working in DaVinci Resolve or Final Cut. Premiere's warp stabilizer is terrible, but the other ones, there's a lot you can do without stabilization. And actually, like the Ibis is great from 24 millimeters tighter on the R5, but if you go any wider than that, you're better off just turning off stabilization altogether. Now, one of the other drawbacks that seems to be the case is if you're wanting to shoot that AK60 RAW or AK50, you need to have more power. You need to have an external power source, either through a D-tap or through the USB-C on the side. You'll need extra power if you want to run those things, and apparently it's because it just takes so much power to process the raw AK60 that there just isn't enough left for it to run, you know, all the lens data. So operating the lenses, the autofocus, the iris adjustment, all those things needs just a little bit of extra power coming from an external source. which also makes me wonder if this is also part of why they got rid of the Ibis, is because the Ibis would have been just more power that needs to be organized and dealt with. And maybe it was just too much. Maybe it was that was the thing that was holding it back and they got rid of it, which I don't think is a huge loss. I'm not a huge Ibis shooter. I don't know. I'm still getting used to it. I have mixed feelings about Ibis. And so as for price, this camera is coming in, at least in the US, for $4,499. And so that in Canada, that means it's about $6,000. The question is, will I be updating? And honestly, I don't think so. Not currently. Maybe in a couple years it'll make more sense. But right now, I still like my R5. I still find it very useful. And considering my shooting use and like how this thing works for me and my workflow, I have a dedicated cinema camera. That's going to be my main driver. Now, as for the R5, it's my B cam. It needs to be able to take stills fast and video fast and switch between them really quickly. I use it for vlogging, and so I don't really need a really great second B camera that's like heavily video focused. And one thing that just seems like a real downside to me for the R5C is the fact that you can't take photos in video mode and you can't take video in photo mode. I could be totally wrong, and I want to be totally wrong. Please let me know if I'm wrong, because that might change my mind. But currently everything I've heard is it's you get one or the other. And I already feel like it's too much the case on the R5. Like the R5 and the EOS R, in photo mode you can take video, but in video mode you can't take photos. And I wish it was the other way around. And I wish you could just like keep your settings, take your photo, shoot your video, have it the same, and not have to switch between the two. Or at least have the option whether you want to keep it the same or switch between the two. Anyways, that's my gripes. And so right now I'm not feeling the limitations on the R5 so much that I would switch. Who is this for? This is kind of someone who just wants one body, right? You just want one camera that does everything. You don't care if it switches fast, right? You'll have, a photo session and you'll have a video session, and you'll keep those very separate. It's also for someone who, wants it's a really great video camera and it's a really great photo camera, right? Like you can't go wrong with it in that way. Like if you were going to do, say, shoot a documentary and you needed XLR access, you needed a light camera, and I think that would be a really awesome setup. I'm kind of trying to talk myself back into it, but the reality is my preference for myself is, actually, I don't know. To be honest, I think if I was to switch out a camera for the R5C, I would be switching out my C200. And I am not entirely sure what I'm going to do. But I would say that the R5C is a really awesome camera. And if you only have one camera that needs to do photo and video, and you're really partial to Canon, the R5C would be an amazing choice. So whether I do it or not remains to be seen. So if this video was helpful, hit the like button. If you want to see more videos like this, I'm going to try and be more consistent again. And so subscribe and follow along. There will be more videos. There will be. And anyways, I'll talk to you later. All right, see ya.